He was not born the king of men, but was a child of the common people, who made himself a great persuader, therefore a leader, by dint of firm resolve, patient effort, and dogged perseverance.
The man who wrote those words was a prominent newspaper man by the name of Horace Greeley, who during Lincoln's lifetime was often one of his severest critics. But even critics like Greeley recognized the source of Lincoln's power. Lincoln was a splendid communicator, a great persuader. He understood that the ability to communicate is essential to effective leadership. Lincoln mastered the fundamentals to such a degree that many scholars consider the best of his work, speeches such as the Second Inaugural Address and the Gettysburg Address, to be on a par with the finest pieces ever created in the English language. By following some simple, timeless principles of good communication, Lincoln achieved amazing results, advancing from the lowest ranks of American society to the executive mansion. If a backwoods boy on the frontier can pick up and master these principles, so can you. They can be relearned in any generation by those who seek to become successful, no matter where they came from or how far they want to go. To present these time-honored principles, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln.
I sometimes am asked how I managed to become president. It was certainly not my good looks. A woman came up to me once, she said, "Mr. Lincoln, you're the ugliest man I ever saw in my life." I said, "I can't help it." She said, "You could at least stay home." It was not due to my administrative ability. Prior to leaving Springfield, I'd never supervised anybody except a law clerk or two. My law firm was fairly successful, but more than once we had to admit to clients that we had misplaced important documents. I even kept a cardboard box labeled, "If you can't find it anywhere else, look into this." It was not my formal education. I never saw the inside of a high school, an academy, or a college. What formal education I did receive took place in little one-room schools on the frontier. Grand total of 1 year. But I was good at one thing. I learned to communicate with people. This is an invaluable skill. Through the years, I've noticed that people who learn how to communicate well are more likely to succeed than those who can't. Effective communication can improve your income, make sales, get you elected to office, win friends, and make the world a better place in which to live. I've been asked to briefly summarize what I know about the subject. In order to comply, I will rely on some of my speeches, plus letters, diaries, and newspapers of the time. Here are some underlying and timeless principles that I'd like to share with you. There are 10 of them. Principle number 1. If you want to communicate effectively, you must have something to say. I heard about a man who applied for a teaching job at a little one-room school back in Indiana. The committee asked him, "Do you believe the world's flat or round?" The man was desperate, so he said, "Doesn't matter to me. I'm prepared to teach it either way." Communication is sharing, but you cannot share what you do not have. There's no substitute for knowledge. No matter how skillful a speaker or writer you may be, if you're ignorant of something you could know, or if your knowledge is faulty, you will eventually be found out. I never learned to speak without embarrassment if I had nothing to say. There's a saying among lawyers that you should beware of an opponent who comes into court with only one book. What that means is the opponent has found one fact or one precedent so clear and so powerful that only one is needed. Often it takes no more than one sturdy piece of information to win your case, make your point, support your cause. If you want to communicate effectively, immerse yourself in a subject. I always loved to read. As a child, if I did not own a book, I'd try to borrow it. My father considered reading to be a form of laziness. He may have been partly right about that, because I did prefer reading to manual labor. He taught me to work, but he never taught me to love it. I was particularly fond of newspapers. One of the reasons I became postmaster at New Salem, Illinois, was so I could receive a newspaper free of charge. I also got a chance to read other people's papers before they came by to pick them up. When I became president, I had almost no knowledge of military science. Although I had been a captain briefly in the Black Hawk War, I had never seen combat. I never saw bloodshed, although I did engage in several ferocious battles with mosquitoes. To give you some idea of the depth of my knowledge, I was once drilling my little company, and we came up to a fence. I didn't have the slightest idea what command to give them to march around the fence. So I gave the command, "Company, halt." Then I told them, "We will assemble in a few minutes on the other side of the fence." Little did I know that one day I would preside over the costliest and the bloodiest war in human history up to that time. I gave myself night and day to the study of military affairs. I obtained numerous books from the Library of Congress. As the war progressed, I pored over reports and held long conferences with eminent generals and admirals until I learned how to ask good questions. To gain information, you may want to rely on other people to help you gather it. During the years that I practiced law, my law partner, Billy Herndon, often did the background research. Billy compiled a large notebook filled with information on briefs and authorities cited for the cases that we handled. It just makes good sense to team up with people who know what you don't know, or who can do what you can't do or don't want to do. Let others help you, but find your own voice. I received some excellent advice from William Seward for my first inaugural address. He suggested that I write, "Although passion has strained our bonds of affection too hardly, they must not, I'm sure they will not be broken." I chose to write instead, "Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." Often your research will turn up an idea that you can adapt to your own needs. When I resided in Springfield, I came upon a sermon written by Theodore Parker. In it, Parker spoke of direct government over all of the people, by all the people, for all the people. Sound familiar? It should. I underlined those words and years later used them to conclude my remarks at Gettysburg. That these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Principle 2. Learn to speak and write clearly. Among my earliest recollections, I can remember how, when a mere child, I used to get irritated when anybody talked to me in a way that I could not understand. I can remember going to my little bedroom after hearing the neighbors talk of an evening with my father, and spending no small part of the night trying to make out what was the exact meaning of some of their dark sayings. I could not sleep when I got on the hunt for such an idea until I'd caught it. And when I thought I'd got it, I was not satisfied until I'd repeated it over and over again, until I'd put it in language plain enough, as I thought, for any boy I knew to comprehend. This was a kind of passion with me, and it stayed with me. For I'm never easy now when I'm handling a thought. till I bounded it north and bounded it south, bounded it east and bounded it west. I also learned at an early age that if you want to be clear in your communications, you have to state your thoughts in a logical order. In my youth, I studied and learned the writings of Hugh Blair, who was an expert on rhetoric and composition. Here's what Blair taught. Embarrassed, obscure, and feeble sentences are generally, if not always, the result of embarrassed, obscure, and feeble thought. Thought and language act and react upon each other mutually. He that is learning to arrange his sentences with accuracy and order is learning at the same time to think with accuracy and order. I enjoyed analytical exercises. Most people think grammar to be pretty dull, useless, but I loved it. I was impressed by the logic of language. I looked for just the right word and tried to place it in the right order. Billy Herndon later described my general attitude, which I think fairly expresses my tendency. He said Lincoln was pitiless and persistent in the pursuit of truth. His thought processes were slow, but they were cold, clean, and exact. I found that I could communicate more clearly if I tried to compress as much information as I could into as few words as possible. Rarely is a long presentation as effective as a concise one. I happen to agree with Mark Twain. He said, "Not many sinners are converted after the first 20 minutes." That reminds me of a story about a long-winded politician. He went on and on. Finally, man got up and headed toward the door. And said, "Where are you going?" "Going home to shave." "Why didn't you shave before you came to the meeting?" "I did." I always look for the nib of the kernel of a story, the heart of an argument. Many of my instructions to military men went out over the telegraph wires. So I learned to use pithy, telegraphic comments. When Robert E. Lee's troops were retreating from Richmond, I wired General Grant. "General Sheridan says if the thing is pressed, I think Lee will surrender. Let the thing be pressed." Principle 3, be credible. You can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time. But you can't fool all the people all the time. Speaking of fooling people, there's one person you should never try to fool: yourself. I once wrote, "If at last when I come to lay down the reins of power, I've lost every other friend on earth, I shall at least have one friend left, and that friend shall be deep inside of me." I'm not bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I'm not bound to succeed, but I am bound to live up to the light that I have. If that internal friend is pleased with you, credibility will naturally follow. As Shakespeare put it, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man." If you want to be credible, treat facts with respect. When I was a young man, I became a surveyor, spent a great deal of time studying mathematics in general, Euclid in particular. This taught me the need for accuracy and precision. Later, my study of law taught me how important it is to get things exactly right. If you didn't, you ran the risk that your opponent would seize on some inaccuracy and win the argument, even though you had the better case. I once defended a man by the name of William Duff Armstrong in a sensational murder case. I managed to save him from possible hanging with one important piece of information. A witness claimed to have seen my client murder a man by the light of a full moon. I produced an almanac that showed that the moon had not even risen at the time the murder occurred. If you want to be credible, don't be afraid to change your opinion if new facts present themselves. As my contemporary, Ralph Waldo Emerson, put it, do not be overly reverent about the actions of the past. Avoid any foolish consistency. Disenthrall yourself of your old biases and customary ways of looking at things. I told Congress, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. I did not have everything figured out when I became president. It's probably a good thing for the country that I did not. I responded to facts as I discovered them. If I made any assertion not warranted by facts, and it was pointed out to me, I withdrew it cheerfully. During a debate over what should be done about Reconstruction, I took a definite position, but stated, as bad promises are better broken than kept, I shall treat this as a bad promise and break it whenever I shall be convinced that keeping it is adverse to the public interest. When you have more light, you may see that your earlier position was wrong. That happened to me more than once. For example, when General Grant besieged Vicksburg, I thought he should have pursued a different strategy than he did, but he succeeded. Here's what I wrote him. My dear General, I write this now as a grateful acknowledgement for the almost inestimable service you have done the country. I wish to say further, I thought you should go down the river and join General Banks. And when you turned northward east of the Big Black, I feared it was a mistake. I now wish to make the personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. If you want to be credible, let your actions flow from basic principles. When I was practicing law back in Springfield, I was approached by a man who asked me to bring suit for $600 against a widow and 6 children. Here is the reply that the law firm of Lincoln and Herndon sent the man. Dear sir, yes, we can doubtless gain your case for you. We can distress a widowed mother and her 6 fatherless children and thereby get for you $600 to which you seem to have a legal claim. You must remember that some things legally right are not morally right. We shall not take your case, but we'll give you a little advice for which we will charge you nothing. You seem to be a sprightly young man. We would advise you to try your hand at making $600 in some other way. Principle 4. Use stories, analogies, and imagery. If you want to be a persuasive communicator, it's not enough just to get things exactly right. Your audience may quickly forget the facts, the statistics, the arguments that you use, but they are likely to remember your stories and your examples, the imagery and poetry of your language. Show your audience. Don't tell them. Paint a picture and they'll carry it along with them. Riding the circuit for many years and stopping at country taverns where lawyers, jury members, witnesses, and clients were gathered, we would sit up late narrating to each other our life's adventures, the things which happened in a new country, surrounded by novel conditions. Those stories supplied me with an exhaustless fund of anecdotes. They've helped me enforce or refute an argument better than all the invented stories of the world. Often, I was able to avoid a long and useless discussion by others or a laborious explanation on my own part by a short story that illustrated my point of view. So, too, I could blunt the sharpness of a refusal or the edge of a rebuke with a little story. I could save wounding someone's feelings and still achieve my purpose. I often prepared people to expect something humorous by stating in advance, that reminds me of a story. They'd start grinning as soon as I said it. One time somebody came up to me and said something so preposterous, I paused and I said, that doesn't remind me of any story I can think of. Another good way to explain a thought is to compare it with something the listener already knows or understands. In the Gettysburg Address, I use the analogy of procreation and birth. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. Some of the imagery I used in my speeches, writing, and ordinary conversation was fairly graphic. I wanted people to see, smell, and feel my ideas. The first of my speeches that attracted national attention contained this statement: a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. You can sometimes use imagery against your opponent. In one of my debates with Stephen Douglas, I described his argument as thin as a soup made by boiling the shadow of a pigeon that starved to death. Animal stories, incidentally, often work very well. A petitioner once came to him and he wanted me to personally pursue his objective because he felt the problem would be attacked with more energy if I did it than if my secretaries would. I had to admit that he was correct. It reminded me of a story. See? About a man who had a little terrier that whipped every dog in the neighborhood. The owner of a very large dog that had been whipped by the terrier came up to the man and asked why his dog was so successful. The man said, "It's no mystery to me. Your dog doesn't get mad till the fight's half over. My dog stays mad." I tried to express my thoughts in poetic language. I tried to communicate with the ear as well as the eye. Did you know I was a poet? One of my first poems I wrote in my copybook when I was just a youngster. Let's see if I can still say it. Abraham Lincoln is my name, and with my pen I write the same. I write in haste and speed, leave it here for fools to read. Abraham Lincoln, his hand and pen. He will be good, but God knows when. My lifelong fascination with poetry sometimes gave my writing and my speaking a lyrical or a song-like quality. This carried over into much of my speech making. I tried to link my sentences and my paragraphs together. I was particularly fond of grammatical inversion. Instead of saying, "We fondly hope and fervently pray," in the second inaugural address I said, "Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away." If you look at the Gettysburg Address, you will see that I relied upon phrases that sounded like the staccato tapping of a drum beat. We are engaged. We are met. We have come. We cannot consecrate. We cannot dedicate. We cannot hallow this ground. I like to string musical words together and then tie a knot at the end of the sentence with several monosyllables. In my 1862 message to Congress, I expressed my thoughts this way. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. Honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. If you want your words to be remembered, make them sing. Learn to communicate with the ear as well as the eye. Principle 5, use humor. One of the best ways to be memorable is to use humor. My father had a large inventory of funny stories, and he told them well. Neighbors used to come over to our place in the evening just to listen and swap stories. Speaking of swapping stories, many of the stories associated with my name aren't mine. I swapped and borrowed them from others. In fact, I consider myself a retailer of ideas, not a manufacturer. I always loved humor, whether spoken or written. Humor makes you more alert, takes another look at things, turns the thing over, gives it another dimension. Humor's entertainment. It's a medicine for pain. It's an effective weapon and a stout defense. When I arrived in Washington, people were coming up to me all the time. They would rush up to my carriage on the street with their resumes in their hand. I was besieged by office seekers. Most of them had no merit, only need and greed. One woman, in fact, came up to me and she said that she wanted an important post for her husband. I said, "Well, why didn't he come himself?" She said, "He's home drunk." When I caught the smallpox, I told my secretary to tell all the office seekers to come at once. At last I have something I can give everybody. The editor of a small weekly publication called one day at the White House. He told me that he was the first person to suggest my name in nomination for the office of president. I told him, "I hope you'll feel perfectly easy about that. I forgive you." You can use humor as a weapon to attack an idea or blister an opponent. Judge Douglas told one of his friends during our debates that every one of my stories seemed like a whack on his back. He said nothing else, not any of my arguments or any of my replies disturbed him. But when I began to tell a story, the judge said he felt he was overmatched. I wish I'd known how he felt at the time. I'd have told more of them. Humor, however, to be used effectively, must be used with care. Some people detest jokes and have a low opinion of people who tell them. And you may injure someone's feelings without intending to. That being true, if you employ humor, one of the safest forms is self-deprecation. I told a political rally once, "My opponent is spreading a vicious rumor about me. He is alleging that I am two-faced." Now, I put it to you. If I had two faces, you think I'd wear this one? Years ago, I was shaving one morning. This was before I grew my beard. Looking in the mirror, I thought, "My Lord, Abraham Lincoln, you're one ugly man." Made me so unhappy, I made a vow that if I ever met a man uglier than myself, I'd shoot him on sight. Not long afterwards, I came upon a man who was the ugliest person I'd ever seen. I thought, Lincoln, this is your lucky day. I pulled my gun and told him to prepare to meet his maker. He said, why, Lincoln? I told him about my vow. He said, do you honestly think I'm uglier than you are? Yes. Fire away. If I'm uglier than you are, I don't want to live. You're not likely to receive a letter of complaint if you're making fun of yourself. Principle 6, ask questions. From my earliest days as a lawyer, I learned how important questions can be in winning a case. I made it a practice to put the burden of proof on the opponent whenever possible. Good questions have immense value in communication and leadership, yet they're frequently underused. People who are skillful in sales will tell you there's no reason to tell prospects something they themselves can discover. You can use questions to gain information or guide a conversation. Often the other party will not even know they're being guided. By means of questions, you can get them to think about a subject they might not have considered previously, or lead them to look at the subject in a different manner. Questions can be invaluable in developing reports. I arrived at the final draft of the Emancipation Proclamation through little steps. Every day, I would write a few lines on a long sheet of paper in the war telegraph room, think about it, and lock it away. This continued for several weeks. During this time, I asked questions of various individuals and groups. Sometimes I played devil's advocate. Here are some of the questions that I asked. How would we feed and care for such a multitude? What if the slaves were armed and then went over to the other side? How would the edict be received in Europe? This question and answer process helped me feel my way to the final draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. Questions can make a statement. I once asked one of my overly cautious generals, if you do not intend to use your army, may I borrow it for a while? You can use questions to show interest in the other party. People are not likely to help you very much if they think you're interested only in yourself. You can use questions to hold the other party's interest. People's eyes will glaze over if you're talking continuously. But ask a question or two, and you have their attention again, and you know it. Principle 7, know your audience. If you want to be an effective communicator, you must learn as much as possible about your audience. I spent a lot of time persuading juries. In a sense, that's what we do when we communicate. We are persuading juries. So you must consider the type of person you're trying to communicate with. Some people want all the details. Others want only a broad outline. Some are moved by emotion. Some distrust emotion. Study your audience to determine if they are ready to listen, ready to follow. Henry David Thoreau said, it takes two to speak truth, one to speak and another to listen. Is the person capable of understanding and accepting your message? One of the biblical proverbs puts it this way, rebuke a wise man and he'll love you. Rebuke a fool and he'll hate you. All people are not ready for all of your message all of the time. Many of my letters were explicitly designated confidential. I knew that the public at large was not capable of accepting and understanding some of my observations and comments. Study your audience to determine what is their attention span. If you have an auditor who has the time and is inclined to listen, lengthen it out, slowly as if from a jug. If you have a poor listener, hasten it, shorten it, shoot it out of a pop gun. Listen more than you talk. Shakespeare wrote, "Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice." It's better to let people think you're a jackass than to bray and remove all doubt. Some individuals can dazzle their listeners with their wit, with their French and Latin phrases, with their beautifully chosen words, but they're not effective communicators. Why? Because they do not know where the target is. They spend too much time talking themselves. By listening, you can learn what other people are interested in, what their needs are, what are their sources of information, where their prejudices lie. Principle 8. Convince the audience that you're a friend who has their best interest at heart. When you speak in public, you'll be most effective if you think of yourself not as making a speech, but as someone coming to talk with friends about a subject that's important to them. My election to the presidency came at a time when the nation was edging closer and closer to civil war. Here's what I said. We're not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. I once made some remarks to a temperance society in Springfield about the best way to deal with people who have a problem with alcohol. I began by reminding them of an old saying, "A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall." Then I advised, if you would win a man to your cause, first convince him that you are his sincere friend. On the contrary, assume to dictate to his judgment, or to command his actions, or to mark him as someone to be shunned or despised, and he will retreat within himself. He will close all the avenues to his head and his heart. Such is man, and so must he be understood by those who would lead him, even to his own best interests. Perhaps the greatest compliment I was ever paid was that I was a kind man. Through kindness, you can sometimes avoid turning an opponent into an enemy. There's a big difference. An enemy may agree with your idea, yet oppose you. An opponent may disagree with your idea, yet still like you. And your opponent of today may become your ally tomorrow. It's well known that I'm in favor of short statutes of limitation in politics. I tried to be kind even when I was being abused. Once Governor H.R. Gamble of Missouri wrote me a very hostile letter. He accused me of insulting him publicly and of making remarks that were unbecoming my office. So I personally scribbled some notes on the envelope to him. Quote, "My private secretary has just brought me a letter from you saying it is very cross. As I'm trying to preserve my temper by avoiding irritants, I have declined to read your cross letter. I was totally unconscious of any malice or disrespect towards you, or of using any expression which should offend you. I tried not to match emotions with anyone, especially anyone who was in a bad temper. Once I received a letter from General Hunter, who formerly had a conspicuous assignment in the East. When he was given a command in Kansas, he sent me a sizzling letter. He said, 'I am deeply mortified, humiliated, insulted, and disgraced.'" How's that for a string of words? "I'm sent into banishment with not 3,000 effective men under my command, while one of the brigadier generals is in command of 100,000 men in Kentucky. I replied, Dear General Hunter, I have been and am sincerely your friend. But I am constrained to say that it is difficult to answer so ugly a letter in good temper. I then went on to explain to him that I considered his assignment an honorable and an important one. And I signed the letter, Your friend as ever, A. Lincoln. But timing is important. So I sent it to the general by special conveyance and instructed the person to deliver the letter to the general when he was in a good temper. I always sought to express myself in a way that would spare the other person embarrassment or avoid injuring their feelings. Robert Dale Owen, who was a believer in spiritualism, once cornered me. He insisted that I listen to an excerpt from a book he was writing. Afterward, he asked me what I thought of it. I said, well, for those who like that sort of thing, I should think this is just about the sort of thing that they would like. Which reminds me of a man who came to Washington to see if he could get a pass to go through the lines to Richmond. I told him I'd be happy to issue him a pass if my passes were respected, but they weren't. For over 2 years, I've been issuing passes to 250,000 soldiers in the Army of the Potomac to go to Richmond. Not one of them's gotten there yet. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is in the spirit of what you do. You can be kind when you're saying no, or when you're criticizing or reproving. Words are never put to better use than in the form of a compliment. A well thought out compliment, clothed in just the right words, presented at an appropriate time and place, can be cherished for a lifetime. The ability to communicate in a kind manner is especially critical in dealing with those who love you. Kindness grows out of sympathy for the other person, a we feeling that you have some sense of their joy, their struggle, their pain. But kindness, to be kind, must be expressed tactfully. One of the most difficult tasks is to say something to someone who is dealing with pain or death, to write a letter of consolation. In 1864, I sent this letter to a war mother, a Mrs. Lydia Bixby. Dear Madam, I have been shown in the files of the War Department a statement that you are the mother of 5 sons who have died gloriously on the field of battle. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any words of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming. But I cannot refrain from tendering to you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the Republic they died to save. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Yours very sincerely and respectfully. Principle 9. Consider the consequences of your message. Think about your message long and hard before you speak or write. Give no unexamined thought your voice. Work your way through your doubts. I was a slow thinker, but I was even slower about communicating ideas that were not thought out. There will be times when you will want to take great pains to avoid being misunderstood or misquoted. Here are 2 words of advice. First, say nothing. This is especially good advice when you don't know what to say, or when the occasion is volatile and anything you say might ignite it. That was the case just before I took the office as president. The move toward secession had already begun. The disunionists were looking for any comment that might be seized to justify what they were doing. So I avoided public comments, replying that my position had already been made abundantly clear in previous remarks, debates, and speeches. The second word of advice is, sometimes write out your comments. I often spoke without notes. Even though I did a great deal of research for my debates with Judge Douglas and compiled a reference book full of information and quotes, I seldom used it on the platform. However, after I became president, I had to be more cautious. During the war, it was rather common for serenades to take place at the executive mansion, and I and other high-ranking officials would often be asked to make a few remarks. Sometimes these remarks would be butchered when they appeared in the newspapers. So my secretary, John Hay, took to writing out the night speeches as I gave them. For at least one serenade, I wrote out my remarks in advance and read from a manuscript. As a communicator, you have the power within you to bring out the devil or the angel in your audience. Just beneath the surface of individuals and nations reside resentments, fears, and angers. These can easily be stirred up. But you will also find an ample supply of kindness, generosity, heroism. I always tried to appeal to that side of human nature. When I delivered the first inaugural address, I stated, "The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." Learn how to appeal to the better angels whenever you can. Shortly before my assassination, I told my cabinet, "I hope there will be no persecution, no bloody work after the war. None need expect me to take part in hanging or killing them. Enough lives have been sacrificed. We must extinguish our resentments if we expect harmony and union." The Civil War might have been followed by an orgy of vengeance and widespread hangings, wounds that might never have healed had I not pled for forgiveness and reconciliation. Think about the impact your message will have before you deliver it. Keeping your objective in view will help you guard against excesses of emotion. If you're tempted to say something harsh to somebody, ask yourself, what will an angry message accomplish? Will it destroy the relationship? Will it produce an angry reaction? Or will it generate positive results? Let me tell you about a letter I never sent. This letter was written to General Meade shortly after the victory at Gettysburg. His soldiers had inflicted a deep wound in Lee's army, and Lee had retreated to the Potomac, which had overflowed its banks. With a decisive move, the war might have ended then and there. But Meade did not pursue Lee aggressively. By the time he did, the waters had subsided and Lee's army had escaped. Here's what I wrote. My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within your easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our other late successes, have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it. I filed that letter away. I never sent it. I considered the consequences of sending it. Meade was the best man I had for the job. If he had resigned, I would have been worse off. There's one further benefit of keeping your objective in view. If you're thinking about the impact your message will have on your audience, you'll have less time to think about yourself. This is one of the best ways I know to eliminate fear of speaking. Quit thinking about yourself. Think about your audience. Think about your objective. Speaking of keeping your objective in view, reminds me of a story. Years ago, I was running against a famous evangelist by the name of Peter Cartwright for the U.S. House of Representatives. I attended one of his prayer meetings, which was actually a political rally. By and by, he asked everybody to stand up who wanted to go to heaven. Well, I kept my seat. Then he asked everybody who didn't want to go to hell to keep standing or stand up. I remained in my seat, the only person in the house. Cartwright then looked at me. He said, "Mr. Lincoln, where do you intend to go?" I said, "If it's all the same to you, I intend to go to Congress." And I did. Principle 10. Improve your ability a little bit every day. I always tried to expose myself to the biggest ideas and the best communicators I could find. As a youngster, I steeped myself in biographies of George Washington, selections from Cicero, Demosthenes, dramatic passages from Hamlet, Falstaff, and Henry V. I learned from the writings of Thomas Paine and the speeches of Daniel Webster. As a boy, I practiced public speaking without even knowing it. Sometimes after I returned from church, I would assemble my childhood companions on logs and stumps, and I would deliver a parody of the sermon, much to their delight. I tried to hone my communication skills by becoming a member of literary groups and debating societies. I was a member of the New Salem Debating Society and often walked 6 miles to practice before that group. When I moved to Springfield, I helped form a similar group there. The advantage of being a member of such a group is that you can obtain suggestions and criticism. Whenever I could, I subjected my work to scrutiny from individuals whose opinion I respected. I delivered my first inaugural address on March 4, 1861. But I'd written the first draft weeks earlier in Springfield. It was set in type, and I circulated it to several close friends. They offered suggestions for improving the address, several which actually I incorporated into it. I learned to benefit from criticism. My cabinet was composed of outspoken individuals who forcefully expressed their differing views. Even my supporters found fault with me. But I learned that one good critic telling you what you're doing wrong can do more to help you than 10,000 people telling you how great you are. In order to improve, I pondered over my ideas, often refining my arguments by writing them on scraps of paper. Some people have the mistaken notion that I composed the Gettysburg Address on the back of an envelope on the way to the cemetery. Nonsense. I thought about it and worked on it for weeks. You don't think I made a long trip from Washington to Gettysburg to say something off the cuff, do you? If you think that, you do not know me at all. I was revising it and polishing it and trying to make it better on the way to the cemetery. You see, my philosophy is every day to do something, no matter how small, that will make you better. Every day, take at least one step toward Zion. That's how you become an effective communicator. One step at a time. Continuous improvement, I think you call it today. I freely confess that I've had a long-time love affair with words. I learned about them in little ABC schools on the frontier. I became fascinated by them in front of a pine knot fire. I watched my storytelling father use words to hold the neighbors captive. And I learned to treat them with respect with anybody who would show me. Words have been used to cheer me and to praise me. They've also been used to mock, attack, and wound me. But I've never lost faith in their power or their durability. Words can reveal thoughts, conceal pain, paint dreams, correct errors, and pass along dearly bought lessons to the latest generation. Words can transport knowledge from the past, interpret the present, speak to the future. Words can span geographical boundaries or build barriers between them. Words can inflame passions or cool them, stir up the worst or find the best, pull down or build up, tarnish or cleanse, destroy or strengthen, damage or bind up and heal. The ability to use words wisely can endear you to your fellows, win them to your side, and enable you to rise to heights you may now only dream of. That happened to my father's son. Pursuing the mastery of words is worth the time, the money, and all the energy you can muster. What you invest will be repaid with interest compounded. Build up your knowledge so that your words will be informed. Order your thoughts so that your words will be logical. Nurture your spirit so that your words will be true, kind, and wise. The world may little note, nor long remember what you say here, and yet it may. For words, once released, take on a life of their own and find lodging in places and hearts you may never know. After many days, those words may return to haunt you or to bless you. Think carefully before you let them go.
This has been Lincoln on